And then after.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon. We're waiting? Okay. I gotta wait for the tech people. Okay, I got the signal. Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon, Brooklyn College. My name is Gaston Alonso. I am the director of the Ethel R. Wolf Institute for the Humanities at Brooklyn College. And it is good to see faces. So this is our fourth event in this marathon that we are on called Hess Week. And it's good to see so many faces who've been with us since yesterday's welcome ceremony. We had a really amazing panel this morning on the intersection of faith and justice. And we are in for a literary treat today. But before we get to the event, just some quick announcements. First, if you're a student and you're here for extra credit, if you didn't sign in on the way in, please sign in on the way out. Second, I just want to announce that we are recording this event. Actually, we're live streaming on the Wolf Institute YouTube channel. And a recording of the event will be available on the channel. And the next thing is, we have a special raffle. So some of you came in, you filled out your name on our raffle tickets. If you have not, look for Kiana back there holding the purple bag. We'll be giving away some hard copies and some electronic copies of the books that we'll be talking about today. And then I just want to encourage you, right after the event, we got 10 minutes, and then we start again, because it's a marathon. It's like a marathon for nerds and socially committed people. So at 3:40 right here, we have a panel on Asian American mental health, which I hope you will stay for, with some rock star clinicians and scholars. And then tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., right here at the Tanger, our Hess scholar, Russell Young, will present his Hess Memorial Lecture. Looking back at the history of Asian American resistance and see what lessons it has for us today. But you didn't come here to hear me talk, so I am going to turn it over to my amazing colleague in the history department, Alvin Bowie. All yours.
Hi, everyone. You're also not here to hear me talk, but I will very briefly introduce our panelists and the memoirs for today, and then I'll talk a little bit about the title of the event and something Gaston has been saying I've been thinking about and how it relates to all this. So these are the two books that we'll be talking about today. I should probably bring them over here because I need them. For this panel on Recuperating Collective Stories, Writing Chinese American Memoirs. So our first panelist is Ava Chin, who very briefly is Professor of Creative Nonfiction at CUNY, Head of the Grad Center's American Studies Certificate Program, and a visiting scholar at Oxford University. She is the author of Mott Street, A Chinese American Family's Story of Exclusion and Homecoming, and her full biography is available here. And for Russell, many of you know him already from this is the fourth event, so 3 other events. Russell Jung is the 2025-2026 Robert L. Hess Scholar in Residence, Professor of Asian American Studies at San Francisco State, and co-founder of Stop AAPI Hate. He is the author of At Home in Exile, Finding Jesus Among My Ancestors, and Refugee Neighbors. So those are the 2 novels, the 2 memoirs we'll be talking about today. And something Gaston said, has been saying, he says, this is going to be a panel about memory and history. And I said, oh, that's a very convenient slippage of the tongue for me. And I started thinking, okay, memory, memoir, where does the word memoir come from? And then, of course, history, right? What are the connections between these 3? So students in my class know I love using Wikipedia. We all work on a Wikipedia project and editing Wikipedia articles. So I'm going to read a little bit from the Wikipedia article on memoir. And you're going to see the themes. I'm going to give you a very brief thought summary of the memoirs. We're going to have readings, and then we're going to proceed to questions that we've prepared, that I've prepared for the panelists. So if I may, on memoir, I'm going to video mute so I can do this. So memoir, a memoir is from the French word for memoir, which is from Latin memoria, or memory or remembrance.
And it's still being projected, just so you know.
Okay. This one? Better? No? Worse?
Oh, no, it's not being projected.
It's not, yeah, I turned off the
Oh,
video.
you did, okay,
I turned off the video, thank you. So, a memoir is any nonfiction narrative writing based on the author's personal memories. While memoir has historically been defined as a subcategory of biography or autobiography since the late 20th century, the genre is differentiated in form, presenting a narrowed focus, usually a particular time phase in someone's life or career. A biography tells the story of a life, while a memoir often tells the story of a particular career, event, or time, such as touchstone moments and turning points in the author's life. So I'm reading this because both these memoirs don't actually fit what I just read, right? So for Ava, and I'm going to be using Ava and Russell, please allow me. Ava is the only child of a single mother in Queens and found her family's origins to be shrouded in mystery. This book, Mott Street, traces Chen's quest to understand her Chinese-American family story. Over decades of painstaking research, she finds not only her father, but also the building that provided a refuge for them all. So refuge coming up here. In New York's Chinatown, she discovers a single building. She discovers a single building on Mott Street where so many of her ancestors would live, begin families, and craft new identities. She follows the men and women who became merchants, paper son refugees, activists, and heads of the Chinese tongue, piecing together how they bore and resisted the weight of the exclusion laws. She soon realizes that exclusion is not simply a political condition, but also a personal one. Okay? And then reading from Russell's back of the book. At Home in Exile weaves in narratives of longing and belonging as Zheng retraces the steps of his Chinese Hakka family and his refugee neighbors. In the face of forced relocation and institutional discrimination, his family and friends resisted time and time again over 6 generations. Dr. Zheng spent over 2 decades in assisting refugees to resettle in the US, but he came to realize that he, too, was an exile. And this exilic identity as a, quote, stranger and foreigner, unquote, provides wisdom and hope for all Christians engaging in the major societal issues of our day: mass displacement and poverty, racism, and persistent inequality. So I'm hoping you're seeing some of the themes that are coming through, right? One, it's not a specific snapshot of either of their lives. We got 5, 6 generations we're working with here. The themes of exclusion and exile are definitely coming through. And so some of the questions and discussion we'll be having will be pointing at how these themes are interrelated. So, yeah, thank you. So I'm going to ask first Eva to read a selection from her memoir. I believe it's about history.
It's not telegraphed
No?
too much. I'll just read it out loud. It is so nice to be here with you. I don't know if many of you know, but I was an undergrad at CUNY. I got my BA at Queens College, but in my sophomore year, I moved out to Brooklyn and decided to take a semester at BC. I was so impressed by not just the faculty, but my fellow classmates. That I almost stayed. Only I had so many credits at Queens College already that I decided to finish out there. But I made some very long friendships, including some people who are already here in the audience. So just shout out to BC because these connections can be for life. So I'm going to read a section from the early part of Mott Street. Thank you for that kind introduction. I was raised by a single mom. I was estranged from an entire side of my family, and I didn't realize until I was reunited with my father after graduating from CUNY that, in fact, both sides of my family lived in the same tenement apartment building in the heart of New York's Chinatown on Mott Street. And here I take you to the very front of the building. It's a bustling 3-pronged panoramic view here at the intersection of Mott and Pell, and this is where our family story in New York begins. So many generations of my family have lived in this building. great-grandparents, grandparents and their siblings, parents, uncles, aunts, cousins, and now me. Me really meaning I have a studio there. When I last counted, I tallied 49 shins and Doshins in total, many of whom took their first breaths as wailing newborns here. Each wing of the family can trace its lineage back to an ancestor born and raised in the same fertile Pearl River Delta, an ocean and continent away. Although each of them had lived out west collectively through the eras of Lincoln, Grant, Harrison, and Cleveland, it would take decades for their descendants to settle some 3,000 miles away in the apartment building that stood at the heart of the community they called Tongyonggai. It was here on Tong People Street that their descendants became neighbors, lovers, classmates, sworn enemies, and eventually, as fate would have it, through my own birth, family, kin. Then I move you up into the apartment building. I turn my key and enter a small T-shaped apartment. When I first walked into my writing studio, my footsteps audible against the wooden floors, I felt disoriented. I kept feeling like someone was going to shock me awake from my sudden good fortune of being here, and poof, I'd be out on the street again, looking up at the building from outside. This was the place where I was going to be writing the story I've been trying to uncover ever since I was a child, estranged from my father and his whole side of the family. Back then, I grappled with so many questions that spilled over to even the folks who raised me. Who were these pioneering family members who came before us? Who were they in relation to each other? And who was I in relation to them? Then, as now, the long dark shadow of the Chinese Exclusion Act hovered over us all. Chinese exclusion, the country's first major federal immigration restrictions that closed the borders to a specific nationality, not only halted the majority of our legal immigration, but also blocked Chinese from citizenship for 61 years. Coupled with earlier legislation that prevented women from freely immigrating and excluded Asians from naturalizing, these laws left a devastating impact on our communities across America for generations. These discriminatory laws shaped the history of Chinatowns up and down the West Coast and reached all the way out east, laying down the foundation for the very neighborhood in which I'm standing, a community that, with the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing anti-Asian violence, has been embattled and shaken to its very core. Still, despite these many years of racism, Chinatown is the only place for me that truly feels like a refuge. As a writer, I feel it's important to uncover the truths from our collective past, no matter how painful or unsettling the discoveries. And so much of Chinese exclusion has felt personal. As I tried to piece the puzzle together, I was forced time and time again to contend with my own feelings of exclusion, even from within my own family. No matter how old I was, a 20-something-year-old writer seeking my father out for the first time, or a professor mom to a sixth-generation New Yorker, no matter how many times I tried to understand and interview my father, I always found myself here, alone, engaged in a solitary dance with the shadowy specter of having been excluded from my chin side for so very long. It wasn't the only erasure I felt. Growing up, my maternal grandfather, Gene, regaled me with stories about our ancestor on his side, stories about working on the Transcontinental Railroad out west that held me enthralled throughout my childhood and well into my school years. In the 6th grade, when my teacher began the lesson on the nation's first transcontinental railroad, I thought that I already knew everything there was to know about it. But when I opened up a big textbook on American history, I stared in disbelief at the official photograph. What was this nonsense? Why weren't we in the picture? To understand what really happened, I needed to collect as many of our stories as possible. As a college student at CUNY, I started interviewing my family members and made my way out to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints genealogy library in Salt Lake City to look for traces of my railroad working ancestor. This is before Google and the age of the internet, where you actually had to go out and do research by hand. Decades later, I continued the journey as a professor, zigzagging my way across the country to consult archives and experts and to visit my family's many places of detention, the border towns where they crossed over, and their sites of greatest achievement. I even moved my family across the globe as a Fulbright scholar to visit the villages in China that they left behind. Eventually, I uncovered the Chinese Exclusion Act files on each of my major family members, folders filled with intrigue, half-truths, and in some cases, downright lies. It is a general rule of thumb amongst researchers and historians alike that it is the written record that is the gold standard, and the family stories that are long on twisted falsehoods and embellishments and tall tales. But when you're Chinese in America, with roots that stretch back to the exclusion era, it is the historical record that is a fabulous fabrication, and the oral stories passed down from generation to generation like rare evolving heirlooms that ultimately holds the keys to the truth.
Well, thanks, Ava. So I'm really honored to be here with all of you, and especially with Ava and her writing and her story. You should really read her book, and I am so impressed how she's uncovered her family story and wove it in such a beautiful way. So thank you. So I'm going to read a portion, and to give you a little context, I grew up watching a lot of Disney shows, and so you soon realize that every Disney show is pretty much the same story, whether it's Tarzan or High School Musical. How many of you have seen Moana? Okay, I just wanted to make you connected to this experience of seeing yourself in a Disney animated feature where Moana has to go in a search to find herself, right? And so I'll just start there. Thinking about your own search for identity, how we're searching for both home and belonging, and how where do we go on that journey to find home and belonging? Where do you go on that journey to find yourself if you don't see yourself in a Disney story? Part of that story is for people of color. Again, we often feel lack of belonging, but in the discourse of multiculturalism, we're supposed to feel special because we're different, right? And so it's our difference that makes us special. And so I began, because I grew up in America, looking for that uniqueness, that difference that would make me special. And this is my story of trying to find myself, my own uniqueness, my own specialness. I feel slightly proud about being Chinese in the US, because maybe in that way I'm different and unique. But then I thought about it. There are 1.4 billion Chinese in the world. What's so special about being one out of every 5 people in the world? So perhaps I stood out because I was Chinese and American and overseas Chinese. But that's not a unique status either. There are 47 million other Chinese in the diaspora. That's not special Disney material at all. Luckily, I knew that in my blood, I'm Hakka, a distinct linguistic group in China. That might differentiate me from the crowds of Chinese on the bus. That might help alleviate the marginality of not being black or white in America. While growing up, I scarcely knew what it meant to be Hakka. My father proudly relayed to me that the Hakka were, quote, rebels, nomads, and pirates. And I tried to picture myself in any of those occupations, but they didn't seem very marketable. So when I had a free afternoon while traveling in Hong Kong, I went in search of my roots in Xinhuan district. There I hoped to find clues about my Hakka heritage. Perhaps they could have cool styles of art or music. Maybe I could find records of my ancestor and trace my lineage back for centuries. I longed for a metaphorical home where I could hang my hat, or maybe, better yet, in Disney fashion, I could be a descendant of a Hakka king, for all I knew. So I go take the subway to this museum for Hakka in Hong Kong. And I take a subway. And so now I'm at the door of the museum. I'm just like Ava's at the door of her apartment. Before I entered the wooden gates of the museum, I paused to collect myself. My own forebears may have once tread the hollowed halls of Sam Dong Uk, 3 rows of dwelling. I took a step into my past, but quickly discovered only hollow echoes. The hallway was unadorned of art or decoration. I expected to enter a more interesting exhibit than the other spaces, yet the inner rooms were quite barren too. The living room had a wooden bench and a small shrine, but no specific lattice work, no exquisite pottery, not even decorative flooring. I became increasingly dismayed as the bedrooms and the closet containing typical Hakka clothing further revealed the simplicity of my people. Shirts and pants were made of black cloth without any embroidery or coloring. Only the hats were distinctive, for they had curtain fringes used to keep out the sun. I was getting disappointed about the Hakka culture. I expected a little more from a minority group that had been distinct for over 22 centuries. Then I came upon the kitchen. Now I'll see how we make our mark, I thought to myself. Chinese love to eat, so Hakka cuisine must have some fine delicacies. So at this interactive museum exhibit, woks with bamboo steamers were atop brick stoves. And I lifted up the steamer lid and readied myself to discover some scrumptious-looking Hakka treat. Chicken crap dumplings. The signature Hakka food was named chicken crap dumplings. I thought, that must be a mistake, you know, how sometimes you miss something in the translation from Chinese to English. Earlier on the trip, we had a sign with a picture of a slithering reptile and a word, "Warning, snacks may bite." And so I was scanning the surroundings for dangerous Rice Krispie treats. As I read further, I was disappointed to learn that the dish was labeled correctly. Hakka chicken crab dumplings were just tea cakes made of glutinous rice and small black seeds. The seeds looked like chicken crab. Was this the apex of Hakka culture and civilization? There had to be something more inspiring about my people. How else could I feel special about my family and myself?
Thank you both for those readings. I think, one of the themes that comes out is these are very personal experiences. There's the door, obviously, the door motif, but these are very personal experiences. And you're dealing with this kind of interplay between finding out more about your family or finding more about your people, however you define it, and the way that scholars like to find out things, right? So, Ava, you talked about when you're Chinese in America, it's the historical record. That's the fabulous fabrication, which is wonderful, alliteration. So what do you mean by this fabulous fabrication? And for Russell and for both of you, how do you negotiate this in your writing?
Right. So thank you for the question. To really, it goes back to something called the Paper Sun Network. And this harkens back to the Chinese Exclusion Act laws itself. The laws were so stringent that it made it so incredibly difficult for both women and men to get through, that folks, when they finally emigrated over, many times had to come in through under false identity. Now, Russell and I both have family members who came in before the Chinese Exclusion Act was enacted. Chinese exclusion was enacted in 1882 and was repealed in 1943 during World War II, when our government needed an ally in China against Japan. So for that 61-year period, what ended up happening is it blocked a pathway towards our citizenship, and which meant that people could not naturalize. And if you can't naturalize, it means you can't vote. You cannot professionalize. You can't become a lawyer or a judge or a politician. The sound keeps going in and out on this mic. Is that right? Yeah. So that's sorry. Okay. Thank you. So if you cannot naturalize, you cannot also vote out these laws. So that was one of the reasons why Chinese exclusion was so important, and it also set the tone for future immigration restrictions going forward. So by 1917 and 1924, all Asians are banned from legally entering the United States. And there were exclusions against, restrictions against other nationalities that the government didn't want in as well, Southern Europeans and Eastern Europeans as well. But getting back to this paper network, okay, there are a lot of history majors in the room. What happened in 1906 in San Francisco? What major thing happened in 1906 in San Fran?
It was a shake.
There was not calling on you. Anyone? The earthquake, thank you. The San Francisco earthquake, which started major fires across the city, and it burned down the record building to the ground. This was this major opportunity for Chinese trying to get in to then say, oh, actually, my father was born here, but his birth certificate was in the City Hall of Records. And so what then ended up happening was there's a lot of people came in under false identity. The government knew this and created there were certain checkpoints, like later on at Angel Island and at Malone, New York, which is in upstate. I must be speaking too much into the mic, which is usually not a problem, right? So I should I'll just try to stay here. And so what that meant is that there were these huge interrogations. And so officials would ask, like, where were you born, and what was the house like, and like where was it in relation to other houses in the village, and was there a clock, and who is your mother? Is that really your mother, the woman who came in and said she was your mother, or is it not? So then there are these files on each family member that contain these interrogation files, but a lot of the times people bought a fake identity that they were coming on under. So there you get this long, many pages long documents that are actually a form of fiction. The only way that they're really actually truthful is that it has a date and a time for when people came in or were planning to exit the country, because they needed to have their paperwork in order to come back. This was a period of great family splitting up. If you look in the record, because I've gone to China and looked at the genealogy records, there was sometimes like 10 years gap between when the father was last at home in the village and when he came back. And that was all because of Chinese exclusion.
So the question is, how do you tell the story?
When it's based on some fabrication.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, it's a
This is more why we had to do
I wanted
that.
to get up and
Yeah.
get the slides that I usually have
Okay.
and like have the maps up and all that. But
Yeah. So Ava
Historical.
talked about the official record. The only written records we have of Chinese are immigration files, but the only way we can come to the U.S. is to lie. So the only written record of Chinese in America are fabricated lies. Got that? So what you're reading in your history books about Chinese are just lies, and the other parts are oral histories that Ava talked about. And part of the issue for that is that a lot of times families, especially Asian families, I don't know about other groups, who wants to talk about their trauma, right? Their difficulties, their hardships, the abuse they experience, the family pains. And so that part of your history often gets erased because you don't want to talk about it. I live in Oakland, and I've seen people shot by the police, and then there's movies about police shootings. I go, I don't want to watch that movie because I lived through it, right? And so I don't want to rehearse my trauma. And so that's another problem with history is, first of all, the lies are fabricated. The oral histories for our families are often not told because they're traumatic, and you don't want to, rehearse your trauma. So then how do we make up stories of the past? And so our relatives came in the 1860s, and I'm writing about my great-great-grandmother as an 11-year-old coming to California for the first time. I'm trying to think, what does an 11-year-old think about coming to America in the 1860s, right? And is it like Moana? Because that's my only imagination, is like everything's framed by a Disney cartoon. And so, can I see my great-grandmother in Moana? Or, plus, she speaks an entirely different language, right? And so you know if you speak different languages, you have different ways of thinking and understanding and relating to people if you come from one language and then you have to code switch into another language. So if I don't understand my great-grandmother's language, how could I really understand who she was, how she thought, what she experienced? So that's why we talk about it as being a fabulous fabrication. But it is now considered a legitimate way of doing history for marginalized people who don't have a record, who face trauma and racial oppression, and who have to come up, because we did have stories. We did have lived experiences. So it's sort of up to us now. And, they were just trying to survive the immigrant population and generation usually, right? But now, later on, we have the privilege and the honor to actually write about it. And so that's sort of the difficulty, and that's sort of the quest, is rewriting our family stories in ways that are both authentic and legitimate, hopefully true to as much as you can understand the truth.
Yeah, thank you both for the response. I think that really goes nicely into a question about genre and format, right? You both, these are both marketed as memoirs, right? You turn around, it says memoir, and then Russell, you turn the book around, it says biography and autobiography / personal memoirs, right? So why did you choose to use the memoir format? And did you, your agents, or in the writing process think about other formats? How did you negotiate that process?
So I think when I was an undergrad, I was thinking about these stories. In fact, I started interviewing my family members back then, and even recording it on a cassette tape. Yeah, but now my kid is like, "Mom, can I have a cassette player?" And I'm like, "Sure, why?" So I started doing a lot of that early work then, but because I didn't know my father, and I didn't meet him until long after graduating from college. I was working as a journalist at the Village Voice and then music magazines like Spin and Vibe. But in these early iterations of working on the book, I was just trying to write these stories down. And at first, I was trying to write it as fiction because there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know, but it didn't really read well, right? I'm going to say this, but so I went to graduate school and I studied fiction writing at Johns Hopkins and at USC. My mentor was Percival Everett, and So I was. He saw a lot of these early stories, but I knew it wasn't quite right as fiction. But it wasn't until I met my father, and I could see him and know him and talk to him, and then he pointed out, we were on the streets of Chinatown, and he pointed out the building. It was like, you see that window over there? That's where my grandparents, your great grandparents lived. And you see that window over there? That's where Gong Gong Pa Pa lived. That's where I was born. That I realized that there was a building and a structure and a setting for the stories. And then later on, once I figured out that Chinese exclusion was the elephant in the room, the mail to my grandfather in the house would come to this name that wasn't his. And I didn't understand this. None of my friends, family members, had mail coming to them under a different name. And I thought, this is the grandfather who's the grandson of the railroad builder. I was like, is grandpa illegal? And I hate that word. Like, how can a human being be illegal, right? But also, how is this possible that this could happen to my grandfather when his grandfather helped build the railroad that brought the country together in the Arab Reconstruction after the Civil War, right? It didn't make any sense to me. and sorry, I'm going off. Your question though was about
Why memoir?
why
And
memoir?
you-
Okay, so I tried to write it as fiction, and it really wasn't. I mean, it was good, but it wasn't as good as it could be. And it was only until I was really honest and I was ready to write it as nonfiction that the whole thing came together. And my agent did say to me when she was selling it, Ava, when I talk to people about this, they're very excited about you and this building, and they're not really interested in it as a novel. They really want it as nonfiction. And so I was like, okay, then there it is.
So I got a fellowship, some money to write as an academic, lived religion, of how people do religion, how they, stories of religion. So I'm writing these stories of religion because I'm getting paid for it, and then I thought, oh, I could make it into a memoir because the stories for my own experience. But then if you read what a memoir is, it's sort of like a Disney movie. It's and you probably learned about it. You're supposed to have the hero's journey. You guys ever learned about the hero's journey, where you have an adolescent who goes on a quest to find something and then has all these difficulties. At the end, comes up with invaluable lessons about himself. So I had a set of stories like Ava about religion, and then because I'm a sociologist, I have a lot of sociological analysis. Because I want to look at the roots of my stories, I have a lot of historical analysis, so it's like part sociology, part history, part my own lived religious experience. But I have to make it into a memoir, so that means I had to go on a hero's journey and actually learn something from my quest. So I had to figure out, what have I learned from all these experiences, what I do, how do I hang these collection of stories that are just like little snippets, and a lot of them are just my class lecture notes. And so I'm taking, the best jokes I use in class, I'm trying to put into a book. And, but for me, what happened was that I began to see themes like Ava found that this sort of emerged. So I was really sort of fortunate to see that the religious work I was doing with refugees really related to my family's story, because they too had to go through a war-torn departure from China, and that all of us are sort of like refugees in different ways. And so the memoir, usually memoirs about famous people, because people want to read about a famous people. Who wants to read about, and Ava's story really is interesting, but who wants to read about someone who's not special, right? It's like, so that's why my book doesn't sell. It's not
So I just want to say that what Professor Roy read about memoir from the wiki, okay, I tell my students not to look at wiki, but that definition was really quite good. Because a biography is often, we consider it, because I teach memoir writing, I teach creative nonfiction, right? And so biography is considered like the full length of a person's life from A to Z, and they're often the biography of famous people. Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Franklin, right? But a memoir is considered a very focused lens upon a life that is focused on a particular issue, right? In my case, Maud Street, I'm really actually telling the story of the generations of people who lived and died long before I was born. So it's really kind of not, it's a bit of a fudge. It's really biography, but it's focused on immigration, the history of our country's immigration restrictions, and how it impacts all of us today through my lens. And I believe, to get back to your question, why memoir? I write books about large societal issues through the lens of ordinary people. And that is because I believe that issues like food and sustainability, immigration and inequality, American marriage after 1970. I believe that like these larger issues are very important, but an ordinary, even an informed reader can kind of shut down when they think about these very large issues. But I think that when you look at these issues through the lens of the lived experience of people on the ground, ordinary people, people who are not famous, people who are maybe from marginalized communities, that this is the way, it's through the power of the narrative that we can understand people who don't necessarily look like us. And I think that's one of the things that is so powerful about narrative, and particularly memoir and nonfiction narrative.
Yeah, and I'd like to actually push, that's an ethnic studies methodology. So here we just started an Asian American Studies minor. That is one of our methodologies, autoethnography, to understand our community's experience that are often marginalized and unheard, is for us to share our own stories, our family stories that are lived, that are real, to understand what are the larger forces, structural forces, policies, historical experiences, ideological stereotypes that all shape us. And that's what ethnic studies is. And so I really encourage you to take your ethnic studies classes offered here, because then you could share your own story, and it's meaningful. If you see yourself as an ordinary person, but extraordinary in your own ways, I think you might want to write about it.
Yeah, thanks. I'm gonna do the Professor Esty thing and plug. I am teaching Asian American history in the fall, 2:15 to 3:30 Mondays and Wednesdays. So it is in history and in American studies, which is where the new minor of Asian American and Diaspora Studies is housed. So I also do not feel bad that we're taking away any majors. So yeah, what Russell was saying about the jokes in your lecture notes, that's actually in the book. That whole Disney stuff, that is in the book, right? And I forgot to say in the intro that Ava, you mentioned your mentor at Principal Evers, right? Principal Evers. Like I know not everyone might not know who Principal Evers is, but my mentor this semester is Ava Chin. So
This is true.
Yeah. So I've been yes, so we all know Ava Chin. So yeah, I'm in this writing fellowship group, and it's in a creative writing group. So this is the first time I had to start. Some historians, some of us like to think, some of us like to think that we're creative in the way we write, but actually I'm being exposed to a whole new creative nonfiction. Oh, what does that mean? What does that do? How do we do it? How do you reincorporate narrative as a driving force of how you write? So yeah, thank you. Ava in particular, you've been mentioning very specific. I mean, both of you have mentioned Russell in Oakland, and Ava, you've been mentioning specific streets, specific places. So both of you are fifth generation Chinese American, if I'm not mistaken, or at least fifth or sixth generations. Yes. And both fifth generation, though now living on different coasts, right? Even though there's a West Coast story for you, now you've been a New Yorker born and raised in New York. Yep. So could you two talk about the coastal experiences and how that's different? However you want to go at it. Yeah.
Can I just say, all right, so I love this question, because it is very rare that a fifth generation Chinese American from the West Coast and one from the East Coast necessarily are able to get together. So, yay, thank you, Wolf Institute, for bringing us together. Very much appreciated.
Our great-great-grandparents, thank you.
Yeah.
They're looking down. Yeah.
And so my family members, all, it's like if you come from China, you arrive on the boat, and if you come directly to the United States, you're hitting the West Coast, whether you're hitting San Francisco or Seattle or up in Vancouver in Canada. But so we all started there. But the thing that pushed us to the East Coast was after the railroad was completed, there was this huge wave of anti-Chinese sentiment that came about on the heels of a great economic recession that was tied to the completion of the railroad, over speculation on railroads, banks failing, all of this stuff. And as we know, that when there is economic distress, things within the populace can get kind of ugly in terms of scapegoating. And so this happened to Chinese folks who were largely out in the American West, like my family members. For whatever reasons, my family jumped on that railroad that my ancestor helped build and made their way on this reverse migration to New York City, where there was, New York City's Chinatown was basically considered a refuge. I always thought about Chinatown as being like this place where people got together because of, cuisine and family ties and ethnic ties. But in fact, actually, it was a refuge. It was a place where people could go and feel safe because they were fleeing the violence out west. So we wound up here, and eventually, like, my families got to know each other and got together, blah blah blah. So while I'm a very proud New Yorker, when I think about, the Asian American experience on the West Coast, because there are so many more Asian Americans and Chinese Americans out there, I feel a kind of like internal longing. I grew up in Queens before Flushing was really like the second Chinatown. But even then, I grew up on the edge of like very working class white neighborhoods where I was like the only, Chinese American like in the neighborhood. So sometimes I think, gosh, what would it be like to not think about myself as the only, but to live in this Asian American paradise called the West Coast. So can you tell us what that's
So this is what it's like to live in heaven. Actually, both Ava and our families, our experiences are really similar. So when you're in the West Coast in the 19th century, as she said, there was so much anti-Asian hate that in 1 year, 168 Chinese settlements in different cities got driven out by mob violence. 168. These aren't just individual families. These are entire Chinese communities were driven out by arson, by bombing, by,
Yeah, it's
guns.
usually by fire,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
It's a
arson.
fire.
Arson is like, so that happened to my family. We were living in Monterey in a fishing village. They burned down the Chinese fishing village. And like Ava's family went to New York Chinatown, my family then moved to San Francisco Chinatown. So again, Chinatowns do provide ethnic support and language and, cuisine, but it's also, again, the refuge to racism. And then being fifth generation, we sort of gone through the story not only of Chinese, but of Asian American history. So our families will go through mass exclusion and then mass detention through these immigration centers, mass deportation, mass segregation, right? And we live in Chinatowns. And then mass family separation is what my family experienced too. So in those ways, I think what my family's gone through is, again, Asian American history and the history of racism. And then interestingly, as we talk about oral histories, my family never talks about it. You don't hear it like, what? We lost everything in this fire? It's like, what? You had to go through segregation? And so and then I act in these weird ways, and I go, oh, that's just intergenerational trauma that I never, really realized. Like, that's why I'm so weird, is because of the racism that my great-grandparents experienced gets passed down in unspoken ways. And anyway, okay, here's the last thing about living in Asian America heaven. So we're not as constrained in California to a black-white paradigm. And so my mom and my uncles grew up in very Latino communities. They speak Spanish. And so we now live in a Latino neighborhood, and we have a Taco Bell that serves boba in our neighborhood. And there's this huge, the whole window has this big boba, and it's normal. So that's what it's like to live in Asian America heaven. Boba at every Taco Bell in every Latino neighborhood.
Yeah. It's great because of the paradise and the heaven angle and all that. And stay for the next panel on Asian American mental health too, intergenerational trauma and all those connections. I wanted to talk briefly about the covers and ask a question to each of you about the covers. Ava, I'm going to ask you first.
Yes.
Yeah, is this cover art, is it based on a specific photo, or how did it become this? I mean, you talked about buildings. Is one of those buildings you've been talking about one of these buildings?
Yes. So our building is, do you see that sort of greenish tower building? That is Transfiguration Church, which has been around for a long time, at least since the 19th century. And our building is right next to the church on the right-hand side. Do you see that building that looks like it's kind of like on a bend? And it's right in the center. That is our building. If you come by and take pictures, don't bother the neighbors. But if I see you, we can wave hi. So actually, quite honestly, so this book was published by Penguin Press. I love my publisher. I'm very indebted to them. But when you publish a big hardcover like this, you're not consulted about the cover or the title. They kind of choose for you and they go, here, we think this is a really good one. And I actually do think this is a good one. The original one actually was like this. And it's also an image of Mott Street, and you can see the tower there. But this one, they actually got from like an illustrator had already painted that. So they plucked it out of a sort of general mass of art and artists. So it's not actually specific to my book. It's just somebody else thought that part of the street was very interesting to look at. But I am grateful because I think it's a very beautiful cover.
Yeah. And then Russell, you can tell us more generally, but I'm drawn, I read Chinese characters, so I'm drawn to the two, they're a little faded out here, but the two characters, Ke, Jia, meaning Hakka, right? And that's not mentioned in the English title in any way. And the characters show up on the back too. So can you tell us about the decision about like whether you wanted Hakka in the title, or was it something you wanted later on, and more generally the photo,
So why do I have Chinese characters on my book title? It's our secret language, and so it's like when you go to a Chinese restaurant and you look in the wall, there's a whole hidden menu, all written in Chinese, that only Chinese people could order from. No, for me, it's just a tribute to, a connection to my Chinese ancestry. This photograph was actually a newspaper article about my wife, really. So Dr. Joanne, who works in a low-income neighborhood, and so they did a profile of her, and then while they were following the family around, I was going to a bakery. But then the photo turned out very, so the book is about being in exile, and it was a really foggy day, so it looked like we're living in this sort of exilic place. And so that's our car parked across the street, and my kid's like 4 years old. But now he's 6'3", and we just recreated this photo. So I'm holding his hand or my bakery. We still have the same car like 20 years later, and so we're walking out at the same place, but he's like, a head taller than me. We're holding hands, walking out the same bakery.
You need to put that on your
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
Can we see that anywhere?
The next marketing drive for this book.
It'll be the next memoir.
That does bring me to the next. What are you working on next? Question.
Oh.
Kind of nicely. Like, I have, I guess, some related questions. Maybe before we get to that, let's ask about family reactions. Right. Both these memoirs are about your family. Obviously, many people in your family. But could you tell us some of the reactions that various family members have had to reading or experiencing?
Russell, you go first.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ava has more family secrets that are more scandalous.
Read
So
the book.
that's why it's harder. Actually, people ask who's the audience, and what I wrote was sort of, I'm writing to my younger self. And so I sort of think of this book as for my son. And I don't lecture him too much or scold him. I just make him read the book. It has all the values and teachings I want. So he read it when he was younger, and then other family members, they're not as, I think they're not so proud about being ordinary, which is what the book's about, or not being special. So they like it, but no one's really like said you shouldn't have told that story, or yeah, it's just, they realize it's my angle of the family.
In answer to your question, and sometimes people ask me, so is your family happy about the book? And I say, well, it depends on who you ask. So I have family members who have really loved the book, who have really embraced it. My mother really loves this book, and she's kind of a tough cookie, a tough sell. And I have other family members who have, on my chin side, even on my dad's side, who have used my book tour as a reason to get together and have a family reunion, which has been really just wonderful. But I also have other family members who absolutely hate it. If somebody, I've had, these are people who are closest to my father, and they have a lot to say about the book, but they have not read it. So I've had to tell people, you're 100% entitled to your opinion, but I have an aunt who said, oh, I know that you write bad books. And I said, oh, hold on a second. I'm the last person in our family who's gone back to our villages and done the research. So before you start naysaying or trash talking the book, you should read it first and then we can talk. So there are people who really don't like the book because they have their own vested interests in the ways in which they want the family to be portrayed. That side of my family did do well in America, but our great-grandfather and his brothers were once and twice heads of the Long Tong, which in the 1970s was one of the tongs that was referred to in the media as the Chinese mafia. So there are, they had like, their fingers in every pie and almost every vice, making money off of it. And so those family members, the descendants who have done very well, would rather not have that history unveiled. But what I had to explain to people, even when I was doing research for the book, was that, these stories are much larger than any single individual. The story is much larger than myself, my father, your father, blah, blah, blah. This is a story that is about what happened to the entire diaspora across the United States. And because of Chinese exclusion, maybe they wouldn't have done those things, right? Engaged in those kinds of vices and monetized them if they had been able to have access to jobs that other people had access to, right? And so anyway, I often talk to my family members before the book came out that this was a story that was much larger than any single individual, and that's why it was important.
Just connecting what you've been saying about doing research for the book and what you read to us about going to Salt Lake City, to the Church of
Latter-day Saints, yeah.
Latter-day Saints, and both of you mentioned in the book about going back to China or going to your family villages as part of the writing process or the research process. Can you tell us what made you want to make this initial journey? Sorry, just to add one more thing about archives is we're in history class, a lot of you are in history class, and it's not just you can Google things. A lot of these archival documents are still paper. They have not been digitized. They will probably never ever be digitized, at least in our lifetimes, because there's so much paper and there's not enough resources and not enough investment into it. So we still have to go to Salt Lake City, go to China, go to Vietnam, whatever it is, to do the archival research and actually read it with our own eyes. So that's part of this career, I guess. But yeah, what was that initial push, or what was there an initial trigger, impetus, whatever, to go to China and explore this?
I don't know that I had. Growing up in New York, I had always thought I would love to go back to my grandfather's village and see what life was like. And then actually after graduating, I did go back to Toisan with some people who are actually in this room who I met at BC when we were much younger than we are today. And but for this book, I knew that I had to go back and do the research because there wasn't enough archival materials that were here in the United States. And luckily for me, there were family genealogies, the Jiafu and the Zhufu, that existed in the village. And so basically, you go to the village, you ask for the oldest member of the village, and you ask for the genealogy document. And luckily for me, they survived the Cultural Revolution. And people would, like, the old man would come out and bring me like a photo, like something that had been photocopied many times and stapled many times. And then they would allow me to take it and make a photocopy of it in the middle of town and then bring it back to the village. So this was like sort of common practice. And I was glad that they had these genealogy documents. The other thing that I did was I went to the local archives office and I found what's called the Difangzhi, which are like the Chinese almanacs, that the official documents about. They would have things like, this is the population of this area, and it would, this is how much rainfall happens, and this is what kind of crops are harvested. And these were documents that go back to imperial times. Because it was basically government officials would use them as a way to understand this new place that they had to, this new part of China that they had to govern. So going back was really kind of amazing. It did feel a little bit like home, but it also does not feel like home because New York is home, which, by the way, can go back to one of your questions when we're ready for that. But Russell, what about you?
I'll tell, how much time do we have for this session?
About 9 minutes.
Okay, so here's another
Questions, yeah.
not very funny story, but relates. So just recently, we were going through my aunt's jewelry collection, and they were sharing among all the cousins. And then one piece of jewelry was this brooch, that gold brooch, and you could use Google Lens, and it gives the date of when it was probably made. And it was a 19th century piece of jewelry. And I go, wow, this is really cool. This is maybe from my great-grandmother. My aunt got it from her grandmother. And it's one of the few pieces that we have left after, our village gets destroyed in the U.S. and they have to flee. So this is the one remaining piece of jewelry, the last relic of my family that I could hold on to. And so I asked for it because it had so much special meaning for me. And I think, Abe and I search for our family roots. We go back to China. And I don't think my other family members are as interested as I am in family history. So I don't know why I'm more interested. Maybe I have less, I don't know why I'm feeling so isolated here. But for me, again, and maybe some of the students feel, they want to have a connection to their family history, to their story that's been severed here in the United States. That you grew up with your grandparents but couldn't speak to them that well because you speak English and they speak, the language. So I felt really cut off from Chineseness, and maybe finding my family story reconnects me to that Chineseness. And so that's why I went on part of these searches. What happened, though, is that then so I got this brooch, feel this connection to my great-grandmother, and then we were looking through my maternal grandmother's jewelry. And we were just doing this family thing of, like, trying to share the jewelry. And so I got my great-grandmother's brooch, and I'm going through the other side of my family. My grandmother had the exact same brooch. Wait a minute. Why did they buy these same, why did two sides of the family have the same exact brooch? We don't know why, but it's probably cheap sale, like Costco, and they got 6 of the same brooch on discount. That's how they shared it. So it wasn't that special. So now I don't really care about my great-grandmother's brooch anymore because it's so common.
Can I just follow up? I know we're running low on time, but that thing about, like, growing up in America And even though you're fifth generation, when you're growing up, Marlon Riggs, the great Black queer documentarian, said something along the lines of, and I'm misquoting him, that we grow up in America. Part of how you see yourself is through how a mediated lens of media, right? And so I think growing up in New York in the 70s and 80s, I didn't see people on television, and I watched a lot of TV. TV educated me, right? And we didn't see a lot of Asian American stories, if any. And if there were, they were played by white actors. So I think that something about knowing more about the family history, or wanting to know more about the family history, was one way of combating erasures that existed in American society.
Yeah. So it's one thing about Russell, like the humility he has, because I remember something from his long bio, but Russell was named one of the Time 100 most influential persons in 2021, and one of my colleagues who attended yesterday opened up the Time, influential 2020. It's like, oh, he's on the same page as Shohei Ohtani, baseball player. I'm like, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna ask two questions, kind of as a way to end. You can
Whose
answer
head is
both.
bigger?
I don't know. Yeah. So one is kind of going off.
Who's driving a 20-year-old car? I know it's not. I am.
Does he have to bite?
Two questions. You can take one or both, depending. But do you have any words of advice or encouragement to those in the audience, students, that are looking to learn more about the family's histories? And then the other one is, what are you working on now, whether it's writing or research?
I'll just say for young people, it's really important, if you're interested in these stories, to start now. So just start asking questions of family members, and because if you don't do it, there will come a day where you're not able to do it, right? So I feel very fortunate about the fact that I interviewed people when I was still an undergraduate at Queens. Because if I hadn't done that research back then, I wouldn't have been able to write the book that got published recently. And so if you can start now, and starting now means, over dinner, or I really like the meals after weddings and funerals, because people are really opened up. Especially Asian people love talking over food. And if you can talk to people when they're amongst their peers, so like the uncle that never wanted to talk to me, once he was with his cousins and his siblings, I would ask him a question, he would be like, blah, blah, blah. And the other family would be like, come on, tell her the real truth. It wasn't like that. And then they're forced to tell you the real truth. So food is a really great place to start having those conversations over.
Yeah. I'll take the second question. So this book was written pre-pandemic, and then afterwards we had the pandemic, and again, having to experience that, and all that Asian hate. And now we have so much anti-immigrant ICE activity. So my upcoming, hopefully to be published book is about countering the anti-immigrant rhetoric and narrative, and writing about all the gifts and wealth that immigrants bring. So it's called Our Immigrant Inheritance, and it's about the gifts and stories and values of, it's sort of like this book of the people I live with, and just normal people, their amazing stories and the ways they embody what I think America should be.
Where are you in the process right now?
I'm trying to get it sold to a publisher, so if you could introduce me
let's say I'm working on the new book, which is basically a follow-up to Mott Street, and
It's the next street over.
Orchard.
Powell Street, Sawyer Street.
Great.
It's Grand Street. Mulberry, and you know, it's and it deals with the 1965 Immigration Act, what my father was doing as one of Chinatown's first lawyers, when he met my mother, who was Miss Chinatown in 1966, and you know, the disaster that was their marriage and then my birth. So that's that. But it's also about the stories that we grew up hearing, our origin stories, and from a young age, and how that has the power to change the way we see ourselves. And sometimes how, once you get older and you shine a light on those stories, you realize that those stories hold contradictory truths, and that, you know, that they really don't tell everything about yourself. So that's that book. And I'm also talking to producers who are interested in Mott Street as a television show. So fingers crossed.
So who's going to play you?
I think, no, I think Aquafina. Or to play the so maybe so.
There's a photo of Ava in the 90s in here. I won't show it, but yeah, they'll put it up on the casting call. And, you know.
Fantastic. I am afraid we are almost out of time, but I thought you were in for a treat. I did not know we were going to be in for a comedy treat as well. So thank you for sharing your stories and your wisdom, but also you're funny. Thank you so much. So, Ava, pick a name, and then we'll get your book.
Okay. Mitzi.
Woo!
Brianna.
Woo!
My students.
Brianna here? Brianna?
Maybe Brianna had something.
Brianna missed out.
Ah.
Let's pick another name. Another name.
Glenn Kahn.
Woo! Another one of my students.
Step on up and change your booth. Everyone, thank you so much for being with us. We have another panel on Asian American mental health, and tomorrow morning the Hess lecture. Thank you so much, and thank you so much to our authors for being part of this. And Professor
the winners. Yeah. And then you're coming right back.
Let's go out.
Yeah, we're gonna go out.
I'll probably be here tomorrow morning.
Otherwise,
This is my first one.
because, yeah, because the 3:40 has to